if you're out here with us, we need to at least put 2 of these in your car, please. Alright, so, this guy took us on this long chase. He says that it's not because he has any warrants, he doesn't have anything in the vehicle or anything. He's just saying that he had a bad day today and he didn't want to...
Some people disappear quietly. No goodbye, no explanation, no final moment that makes sense. One day they are there, living, planning, existing like everyone else, and the next, they are simply gone. What they leave behind isn't just absence, it's questions, endless, unanswered questions that echo long after the headlines fade. What happened in those final moments? Who was the last person to see them? And most disturbingly, did someone make sure they would never be found? In this video, we're diving into several of the darkest and most unsettling disappearances of recent times. These are not stories with clean timelines or comforting conclusions. These are cases filled with strange behavior, missing answers, and signs that suggest the truth may be far more disturbing than anyone wants to accept. In some of these cases, people vanished under circumstances so suspicious that it's almost impossible to believe it was an accident. In others, the clues point towards something deliberate, something hidden. As we move through each story, keep one thing in mind. When someone disappears without a trace, it's rarely because nothing happened. So take a breath, settle in, and let's begin. Because the question isn't just where did they go, it's what really happened when no one was watching. The question that refuses to go away is a simple one. Where is Melody Buzzard? 9-year-old Melody Buzzard vanished without leaving behind a single clear answer, and what makes her disappearance so disturbing is not just that she is missing, but who she was last seen with, and the trail of strange behavior that followed. Melody lived in Lompoc, a quiet town in Southern California. By all accounts, she was a gentle, affectionate child, friendly, curious, and deeply attached to the few people she was allowed to know. For most of her life, that list was painfully short. She lived alone with her mother, Ashley Buzzard. From the outside, their life was unusually isolated. Melody had been homeschooled for several years, rarely seen by extended family, neighbors, or anyone outside her home. Her mother controlled nearly every aspect of her world, and as time passed, Melody slowly vanished from public view, long before she was officially reported missing. To understand how Melody disappeared, you have to go back years. When Melody was just 6 months old, her father died in a motorcycle accident. What followed was a bitter custody battle between Ashley and Melody's paternal family. They were deeply concerned about Ashley's mental health, her financial instability, and her history of self-harm and hospitalization. For a brief period, Melody lived with her uncle while Ashley received treatment, but eventually, Ashley won full custody. After that, Melody's father's side of the family was cut off almost entirely. Visits stopped, calls went unanswered, photos became rare, years passed with almost no contact. Melody was growing up in isolation, and no one outside her home truly knew how she was living. By 2025, Melody was 9 years old and invisible to the system. That changed in August. The local school district began asking routine questions. Melody was of compulsory school age, and even homeschooled children must be registered and monitored. The school requested documentation. They wanted to ensure she was receiving an education and that she was safe. This attention was the last thing Ashley wanted. Reluctantly, Melody was registered in August 2025 under a hybrid arrangement. She would complete assignments at home, but Ashley was required to bring her to the school periodically to collect materials and allow staff to check in. That visit in August would become the last confirmed sighting of Melody Buzzard. By October, school officials noticed something was wrong. Melody was no longer coming in for assignments. Calls went unanswered, emails were ignored, letters were sent, a home visit was attempted, nothing. Left with no alternative, the school contacted police and requested a welfare check. On October 14th, officers arrived at the Buzzard home. Ashley answered the door. Melody was nowhere inside. When police asked where her daughter was, Ashley had no explanation, no timeline, no story, no concern that made sense. She claimed she didn't know where Melody was. The following day, a search warrant was executed. The house was thoroughly examined. There were no signs of struggle, no evidence Melody was still living there, and no indication of where she might have gone. From that moment on, Melody was officially considered missing. As investigators dug deeper, disturbing details began to surface. Ashley had told different people wildly different stories about Melody's whereabouts. At one point, she even claimed the child had been given up for adoption, a statement that turned out to be false. Relatives described Ashley as intensely secretive, paranoid, and hostile toward anyone who asked questions. Melody had been kept away from doctors, schools, and extended family for years. There were almost no recent photographs of her. In fact, the most recent image of Melody was not taken by family at all. It came from a Google Street View camera in 2023, which happened to capture her outside the home. Then came the revelation that changed everything. 1 week before Melody was reported missing, Ashley and Melody were seen on surveillance footage at a car rental agency in Santa Barbara. Both were wearing wigs. They rented a vehicle and began driving east, out of California, across state lines. Investigators later confirmed the car traveled through multiple states and was eventually tracked as far as Nebraska. Along the way, something even more alarming occurred. Ashley switched the car's license plates from California plates to New York plates. Disguises, plate changes, long-distance travel. This was not a spontaneous road trip. On October 10th, Ashley returned to California alone. Melody did not come back with her. When questioned about the trip, Ashley refused to explain where Melody was, why they went to Nebraska, or what happened during the journey. She remained uncooperative, evasive, and defensive. At one point during the investigation, Ashley was seen tearing down missing person posters bearing her own daughter's face. The FBI became involved on October 18th, classifying Melody as an at-risk missing child. Authorities issued public appeals for surveillance footage along the route Ashley had taken. Vigils were held. Family members pleaded for answers. Ashley said nothing. Then, on November 7th, Ashley was arrested, not for Melody's disappearance, but for false imprisonment. The alleged victim was a man who had visited her home to ask about Melody. According to court records, Ashley became distressed, produced a box cutter, and refused to let him leave. He later told investigators that Ashley claimed Melody was alive and somewhere in Utah, but he had no proof and no way to verify the claim. Ashley was released on bond and placed on an ankle monitor. Melody remains missing. No confirmed sightings, no verified communication, no explanation that holds together. What happened during that road trip? Why Nebraska? Why the disguises? Why return alone? And perhaps the most chilling question of all, if Melody is alive, why hasn't anyone seen her? As the search for Melody Buzzard intensified, investigators quickly realized that this was not a case defined by a lack of information, but by deliberate silence. Every missing child case depends on timelines, on witnesses, on cooperation. In Melody's case, nearly all of that collapsed at the same point: her mother. From the moment authorities became involved, Ashley Buzzard's behavior stood in stark contrast to what investigators typically see from a parent whose child is missing. There were no urgent pleas, no frantic searches led by family, no public appeals asking for help. Instead, there was avoidance. Ashley refused interviews. She declined to clarify basic facts. She would not explain where Melody slept, what she packed for the trip, or why Nebraska had been the destination. Even when faced with mounting evidence, surveillance footage, rental records, license plate changes, she maintained her silence. To investigators, that silence was not neutral, it was telling. One of the most troubling aspects of the case was how completely Melody had been isolated long before she vanished. Child welfare experts reviewing the situation pointed out a pattern. Isolation is often not accidental. It is a control mechanism. Melody had no regular doctor, no consistent school contact, no visible social circle. Her world had been reduced to a single adult. When police examined Ashley's financial and personal history, further concerns emerged. She was heavily in debt, dependent on welfare assistance, and had a long pattern of cutting people out of her life. Friends, family, even professionals who tried to intervene. Relatives described her as paranoid, hostile, and deeply distrustful of authority. Some believed she feared losing custody if outside agencies looked too closely at how Melody was being raised. That fear may explain what happened next. Investigators believe the school's involvement in August 2025 was a turning point. Once Melody was formally registered and required to be seen periodically, Ashley's control was no longer absolute. The system had eyes on Melody again. And then, within weeks, Melody was gone. The road trip itself raised more questions than answers. Why travel across the country with a child while wearing wigs? Why change license plates mid-journey? Why choose Nebraska, a state with no known family ties or clear purpose? Law enforcement experts describe these actions as counter-surveillance behavior, steps taken to avoid identification and tracking. These are not the actions of someone acting impulsively. They suggest planning. Yet despite extensive efforts, investigators hit a wall. There was no confirmed evidence of where Melody went after Nebraska, no hotel records in her name, no verified sightings, no school enrollment, no medical records. It was as if Melody had vanished into a void. Community community reaction grew increasingly intense. Vigils were held, posters flooded the area, social media speculation exploded. Some believed Melody had been secretly placed with another family, others feared trafficking, many suspected something far darker. Authorities remained cautious with their language, but the lack of transparency from Ashley only fueled public suspicion. Then came another disturbing development. Ashley was seen removing missing person posters from public spaces. To investigators and community members alike, this behavior was almost incomprehensible. A mother actively erasing reminders of her missing child raised alarms that could not be ignored. Shortly after, Ashley disappeared from her home for nearly 2 days, prompting further concern. When she resurfaced, she offered no explanation. Her subsequent arrest for false imprisonment only deepened the unease. While officials emphasized that the charge was not directly related to Melody's disappearance, the circumstances were alarming. A visitor, someone attempting to ask questions about Melody, allegedly prevented from leaving, threatened with a weapon, and later stating that Ashley claimed Melody was alive but hidden. Alive but hidden. Those words became the center of renewed debate. If Melody is alive, who is caring for her? Why has she not been seen or heard from? Why has no evidence surfaced, not even accidentally? Experts in missing child cases note that long-term concealment of a child is extremely difficult without outside assistance. It requires resources, cooperation, and ongoing secrecy, and yet no such network has been identified. At the same time, the absence of physical evidence has complicated the case. There is no confirmed crime scene, no recovered remains, no definitive proof of harm. That uncertainty leaves investigators trapped between possibilities. On one end, Melody could be alive, concealed, and isolated somewhere under a false identity. On the other, something irreversible may have happened during that road trip. The truth lies somewhere between what can be proven and what cannot yet be said. The FBI continues to treat Melody's case as active. Tips are still being followed. Surveillance footage from across multiple states remains under review. Authorities have not ruled out any scenario, but time is not on Melody's side. Every passing month makes recovery, alive or otherwise, more difficult. Memories fade, records disappear, trails grow cold. What remains constant is the unanswered question at the heart of the case. Why has no one seen Melody Buzzard since October 2025? Until that question is answered, the silence surrounding her disappearance will remain as disturbing as any evidence investigators could uncover. By the time Melody Buzzard's case reached national attention, investigators were no longer just searching for a missing child. They were trying to understand a pattern, one that had been forming quietly for years. In cases like Melody's, law enforcement often steps back from the individual events and asks a broader question: what kind of disappearance is this? Because not all missing child cases fall into the same category. Some involve abduction by strangers, some are custody-related disappearances, others involve concealment by a parent driven by fear, control, or delusion. Melody's case shares troubling characteristics with the last category. One of the strongest indicators is long-term isolation before disappearance. Experts note that when a child is gradually removed from schools, doctors, relatives, and public systems, it becomes significantly easier for that child to vanish without immediate detection. By the time Melody was officially reported missing, she had already been functionally invisible for years. Another red flag is triggered flight. In many parental concealment cases, a specific event sparks panic, often contact from schools, courts, or child welfare agencies. For Melody, that trigger appears to have been school registration and oversight in August 2025. Once that oversight began, the timeline accelerated quickly. Registration in August, missed assignments in September, cross-country trip in early October, mother returns alone days later. This compressed sequence suggests urgency rather than coincidence. Then there is the matter of countermeasures, disguises, license plate changes, multi-state travel with no clear destination. These behaviors indicate someone actively trying not to be traced. That does not automatically mean violence, but it does strongly suggest intent to disappear from systems, not just from people. Investigators also examined whether Melody could have been handed over to another individual or group. In some rare cases, parents with extreme beliefs or paranoia arrange for children to be hidden within informal networks, often religious, ideological, or survivalist communities. So far, no such network has been identified. No financial transfers, no communications, no witnesses coming forward, which leads to one of the most haunting aspects of the case: the absence of accidental evidence. In many concealment cases, a child eventually appears somewhere, seen at a store, overheard speaking, photographed in the background of someone else's image. Even tightly controlled environments leak information. Melody has not. That silence is deeply concerning. Another angle investigators consider is psychological motivation. Ashley Buzzard's history suggests extreme distrust of institutions, fear of losing control, and an adversarial view of authority. In similar cases, parents have acted not out of malice but out of distorted belief systems, convinced that removing a child from the world is the only way to protect them. However, protection becomes indistinguishable from harm when it erases a child's identity. One of the most chilling elements of Melody's case is the lack of recent photographs. Nearly every image used in alerts shows Melody at 4 or 5 years old. That gap matters. It makes recognition harder. It buys time for concealment. Investigators also noted Ashley's contradictory statements, claiming Melody was adopted, then alive elsewhere, then refusing to say anything at all. These inconsistencies undermine credibility and complicate efforts to narrow down leads. At the same time, authorities are careful not to overstep. Without physical evidence of a crime, charges related directly to Melody's disappearance are difficult to pursue. This creates a frustrating legal limbo, suspicion without proof. Historically, cases like this often follow one of three paths. The first is delayed discovery. Years later, a paper trail emerges, medical records, school enrollments, or witness statements that reveal a hidden child living under another name. The second is confession under pressure. As isolation tightens and legal consequences accumulate, the responsible party eventually reveals the truth, sometimes unintentionally. The third is the most devastating. Confirmation of harm, often through accidental discovery or forensic breakthroughs long after hope has faded. Right now, Melody's case sits uneasily between the first and second paths. The FBI continues to pursue tips along the Nebraska route and beyond. Authorities have not ruled out Utah, despite the lack of corroborating evidence. Digital forensics teams are still reviewing phone data, financial records, and travel metadata, but the longer the silence continues, the harder it becomes to believe Melody is living a normal life anywhere. What makes this case especially difficult for investigators and for the public is that there is no dramatic moment to point to, no confirmed crime scene, no last scream, no violent interruption, just a child who slowly disappeared, and a parent who knows more than she will say. Until Melody is found, every theory remains incomplete. But one truth is undeniable. A 9-year-old child cannot vanish without help. Someone knows what happened on that road trip. Someone knows why only one person came back. And until that truth surfaces, Melody Buzzard's name remains not just a missing persons entry, but a reminder of how easily a child can disappear when isolation, secrecy, and silence are allowed to grow unchecked. At some point in every disappearance, the search slows down, not because the case no longer matters, but because there is nothing left to chase. No fresh sightings, no new footage, no leads that move the needle forward. What remains is a quiet, heavy stillness that settles over everyone involved. That is where Melody Buzzard's case now stands. And that silence is not neutral. Silence has weight. Silence protects something or someone. When investigators look at cases like Melody's years later, one pattern appears again and again. The most critical window is the earliest one. The first weeks. The first months. That is when memories are sharp, movements are traceable, and mistakes are most likely to surface. Melody's disappearance slipped through that window almost unnoticed. By the time police were called, she had already been missing for days, possibly longer. By the time the FBI became involved, the road trip was over, the vehicle returned, the trail fractured across multiple states. And by the time the public fully understood what was happening, the story had already become a puzzle with too many missing pieces. What makes this case especially unsettling is that it does not fit neatly into a single explanation. If Melody were trafficked, there would almost certainly be digital or financial traces by now. If she were living openly under another identity, someone would have seen her. If she had been placed with another family, there would be pressure points, doctors, schools, neighbors, and yet there is nothing, which brings investigators back to the hardest possibility to confront, that whatever happened occurred during that road trip, in a place no one was watching, and in a moment that left no witnesses. This is where many cases quietly collapse, not because the truth is unknowable, but because proving it becomes nearly impossible. There is also the uncomfortable reality that children who are isolated are easier to erase. Melody had no recent school photos, no regular checkups, no social media footprint, no peer group that would immediately notice her absence. Her world had already been reduced to one person. When that one person chose not to speak, the system had nothing to push against. In hindsight, the warning signs were there. A child unseen for years, a parent hostile to oversight, conflicting stories about adoption, sudden cross-country travel paired with disguises. These are not harmless eccentricities. These are behaviors that, when viewed together, form a picture of intent, whether that intent was to disappear, to hide, or to escape consequences. And yet, intent alone does not bring a child home. What Melody's case exposes, quietly but powerfully, is a gap that exists far beyond this one story, a gap where homeschooling oversight can fail, where welfare checks rely on cooperation, where isolation is mistaken for privacy until it is too late. There are children right now living in similar circumstances, not abused, not visibly harmed, just unseen. Cases like Melody's rarely end with dramatic revelations. More often, they resolve slowly through a single tip, a casual remark, a neighbor finally remembering something they dismissed years earlier. Sometimes it's a person who didn't realize what they saw mattered. Sometimes it's a worker who felt uneasy but never spoke up. Sometimes it's someone who knows more than they think they do. That is why silence is the greatest enemy in cases like this. Not the silence of investigators, but the silence of the people who assume someone else will speak. If Melody is alive, time is not her ally. If she is not, time is not justice's ally either. And the longer this case drifts, the easier it becomes for the truth to remain buried under uncertainty. There is a tendency, especially online, to turn missing person cases into speculation, into arguments, into entertainment. But behind every theory is a real child whose life was interrupted and a future that may have been taken away. Melody Buzzard was 9 years old. She liked being silly. She liked being held. She existed. And right now, her existence depends on someone remembering something they have not yet said. So this is where the story ends, for now. But this is not where responsibility ends. If you know anything, even something that feels small, about Melody Buzzard, about that road trip, about a child who suddenly appeared somewhere new in late 2025, say something. If you live along the route from California to Nebraska and remember seeing a woman and child traveling together under strange circumstances, report it. If you work in schools, childcare, housing, healthcare, or social services and notice a child who doesn't quite add up, trust that instinct. Missing children are not found by waiting. They are found because someone decides that silence is no longer acceptable. You can submit tips anonymously. You do not need proof. You only need to speak. Because somewhere, the answer to "Where is Melody Buzzard?" still exists, and it will only come out if someone chooses to bring it into the light.